Hi, this is Mark Frechette from Georgetown County School District, and we recently had a media specialist approach us because they wanted to create a sign-in and sign-out sheet using a Google form and student IDs and a scan gun that would allow students to come in, scan their student ID, click submit, whether they were coming in or out of the media center, and have that information listed so that the teacher could go back and see, to refer to see when students are checking in or checking out and kind of have a log for all of that. So I'm going to show you, I have a simple scan form set up, kind of similar to the way they had it set up, where it just said they created a Google form and it said, you know, scan the barcode, and inside here was just a short answer, a text, and then down here was the status. It was a multiple choice. It was in or out. So students would come in. I'm going to show you the issue. They would come in. They would grab the scan gun. They would grab their student ID. Go ahead and scan it. And according to the way the student IDs were set up and the scanner was reading it, all that would be added to this was the student ID number. They would check in and click submit. I'm going to show you how that shows up on this sample sign in and sign out. So we've only entered one student data just now, or one student ID, I guess, rather. You can see that the good part is that it time-stamped it. It added the student ID number, and it also told us what status they were. So whether they were in, and then as the student would check out, it would also timestamp it, put their student ID and list out. And it would do this for all the students. The issue is that unless that teacher knows all of those student ID numbers by heart, there's no way for them to have a shortcut and go ahead and figure out who it was with this ID and when they checked in and when they checked out. So they wanted to figure out a way that we could go ahead and code this sheet to go ahead and list, as they scanned this in, to list the student's full name in this column here. It sounds really complicated, but it's just a matter of a couple functions, and I'm going to walk you through the process. So there's a couple things you need in place. One, you're going to need a Google form, and you're going to need the response sheet. So again, you're going to set up your Google form with the questions you need, and then you're going to have the response sheet, which you can create after creating the form. The second thing that you're going to need is you're going to need a set of student data. For this, we have a sample set of student data here that lists the student IDs. It shows their last name, it shows their first name, and it shows their grade level. For this, I realize that it's a very small school or sample set of data. And yours could be massive. You know, you could have anywhere to 900 students on this list. So I'm going to show you how to go ahead and create a column in this that shows their full name, because right now each cell or each column has only their last name or first name. And again, in some of these schools we have students with the same last name. So if we use this scan form and we just had to pull their information by their last name, you would have to go ahead and double check again and see, okay, so was that, you know, which sibling was that according to this ID number. So again, we want to list their full name inside of one cell that's associated with this ID. So I'm going to head back to my student data, and I want to create a column here in E that's called full name. So this is the first formula that I'm going to use. And what I want to do is I want it to take the information from this cell in column B, then have a comma, so their last name, comma, space, first name would all be combined into one cell. So for this first one right here, it would be listed as Cohen, comma, space, Tariq. And that's how I would like all of them to appear. Now obviously this is a small sample set, so it wouldn't take me long to type those in. However, more realistically in a school setting, this would have a large amount of students in it that we wouldn't want to take the time and go ahead and type this in. So our first formula, I'm going to go ahead and delete this, is going to join together a string of cells and put it out here. So I want it to show up that way. I'm going to hit equals and then start typing in concatenate I believe that's how it's pronounced, concatenate. You'll see it'll show up right here, fun word to say. And then it asks me, okay, so then what do you want to string together? Well, I'm in this first E1 or E2 cell, you can see. So I want every time that it's in an E cell to take the B cell, which is their last name, that corresponds with it. Then I'm going to hit a comma, because that's how you separate the string of data or what it's going to put into that cell. The next thing, if you remember, so I wanted to say last name, comma, space, then their first name. So in order to code that into this, I'm going to use quotation marks, comma, my space bar, hit the end of quotation marks, and again I separate this with a comma, and then it asks me, okay, so what's the last thing you want to string in there? And that's going to be their first name. So altogether it's going to be, if I'm in this cell, which is E2, I want it to look across and say, we're going to take the information, which is their last name, then add a comma and a space, and then add the first cell. And that's, you can see it actually shows me how Tariq Cohen's name is going to appear. Then I hit enter. Now I want this to go ahead, and I want this to be applied to all of these students. So I'm going to click in the cell. You can see that formula or that function again. And now I'm just going to grab, you can see right here my mouse will change. I'm going to grab this bottom corner and just drag this down. It's going to apply this to all of these cells. So that's our first function. Pretty simple. Now what I need to do is, now that I have this student data set, we now need to incorporate that into our Google form. So I'm going to come up here in between A and 1, and I'm going to click right in the corner. And what this is going to do is it's going to select all of the data that's on this sheet. Again, this is a small data sample. I could probably highlight it. However, if you have a massive amount of information on this sheet that you want it to use, it's easier to click up here and grab all that data. You'll see everything's highlighted, so I'm going to right click and copy. Then I'm going to come back to now the response sheet from my forms. So here's my scan form, and here is the response sheet. So I need to put that student data that we just created behind the responses in this form. I'm going to come down here to the plus, click plus, it'll create a new sheet. And now I'm just going to right click up here and hit paste. And if I did this correctly, you'll now see that all of the information that we just did, including the full name column, will now be listed in sheet 2 behind our information. This is great because, again, we want this behind the response form. So I'm going to click back on this. So again, step 1 was creating the scan form, basically that sheet that we use, and also the response sheet. Step 2 was getting our student data and making sure that we have the right set, and then pasting that into our sample sheet response sheet. So again, this is our form responses. The responses all come in here. This is now where our data is that's tied to that. So I'm going to come back here. This is the last part. Now all I need to do is make our responses that are recorded in the form response sheet here talk to or search this information and then put it back into this column. So I want to list their full name here. So again, it's going to search their ID number. It's going to use whatever's put in here. It's going to use this student ID, search this column, and then it's going to take their full name, and we want it to put it in column D. So I'm going to click up here in this protected header row, and this is where I'm going to insert my functions. And I say functions because we're going to use 2. Essentially, we're going to use one that's called an array formula. And all that means is the array formula says, okay, you tell me what you want to do in all of these cells in column D. I'm going to lock it down. So we're going to use an array formula. Inside that array formula is where we're going to put the formula to code saying, hey, take this data, go search it, and then put back the information we want. So the first one is the array formula. We're going to write equals array formula, and you'll see it pop up. I can just click on it. And then it says, okay, so what function or what formula do you want to use? We want to use what's called a Vlookup. And as I start typing in VLOOKUP, you'll see that it shows up right here. So I'm going to click on it. Now the information we need to include in our VLOOKUP formula is we need to tell it, okay, so what information are you going to use as your search key or your search term? And then where are you going to look and compare that to? And then what do you want to bring back? So the search key is, again, where are you looking? And that's the information that's put in this. So again, right in the barcode under column B, that's where the student IDs are going to come through on the form. So I'm going to type in first the search key, and we want to use everything that's in there. So for this, I'm in column D1, or I guess cell D1. So I'm saying, hey, across from this cell in D, I need you to use this information. So that'd be B1. And even though there's no information there, it's fine. So I'm going to say B1, and then I'm going to put colon B. And you'll notice when I do that, it says, okay, so we're going to do that. We're going to look in the B column or the B cell that's directly across from us the entire way down. That's our search key. I'm going to separate that with a comma. Then it says, okay, so what's your range? Well, the range of data that we're going to look through is on sheet 2. That's the student data. And I want to use this entire sheet. So I'm just going to click up here in the corner. And I want you to see when I click up here what happens. So when I click here, it's automatically going to go ahead and put in that sheet, which is great. So I need to separate that information with a comma. And then it says, okay, so what's the index now? And what that means is, what do you want us to pull? So we want to pull their full name. We want it to come, look on this, find it, and then pull this column. The problem is I can't put a letter this time for the column. I need to put a number. I'm not sure why. I just know that's the way it works. So A would be 1, B would be 2, C would be 3, D would be 4, and E would be 5. So I'm going to put in the number 5. And then I'm going to separate that, just like everything else, with a comma. And then it says, okay, so how is this sorted? Well, I'm going to put in the term false. I am not sure why, and you can see as I start typing, it says false. I'm not sure why, but that's what I'm going to put in. And so after I put in false, I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. You'll see it automatically then takes us back to our form responses, and take a look at that. It went ahead and said, hey, ID 3434, we recognize that based off of this sheet. That's Walter Payton. If we want to go back and double check that just to be sure, we can come back here and we can look for 3434, which is Walter Payton, a 3rd grader in our school, and he happened to check in. So now I want to show you, because we use that array formula and because we put it up here, watch what happens now. I'm going to go back to our original form. This time, I'm going to click in here as a student, and our buddy, Mr. Walter Payton, now scans. He wants to leave. So he's going to click out, and he's going to hit submit. And you'll see that it always takes us back to this submit another response. I'm just going to check that. I'm going to go to our response sheet. Take a look. It now shows us that on January 16th at 10:18, Mr. Walter Payton checked out of the media center. Well, let's try it with one more. We're going to try it with a different student ID to make sure that our formula works. So again, we have our scan form up. They click in the place for their ID. They scan it. We now have another student with ID 5454 checking in. They're going to hit submit. Let's go to our response form and see. And again, 5454 checked in at 10:19. You can see that it is Mr. Brian Erlacher. If we want to check our sheet to make sure this is true, 5454 is in fact Mr. Brian Erlacher, who is also a 3rd grader. Popular time for them to be signing out books. So again, I hope that these formulas didn't kind of scare you away. Remember, really we used 3 formulas today. We used the CONCATENATE, which combined strings of rows, and we did that on our student data to make the full name. And then we used an array formula, which locked it down in this column. It said, always do this formula inside this column. And we used the VLOOKUP, which said, hey, take this data, look it up and compare it to this data, and then bring back certain specific information. So good luck in creating your sign-in, sign-out forms.